And we're live. Awesome. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. We have a very special live today. You're really not going to want to miss this. So I'm going to suggest right off the hop, you like, comment, and share this. Share this across every platform. We have some amazing women here today. To open it, I'm going to let them introduce themselves so you can understand exactly why we're here and we're doing what we're doing today. This information is so imperative and so important to get out to people because the truth needs to be seen. The light needs to shine on the corruption and the tyranny and whatever is being withheld. And I want to give these ladies a platform because there are good people out in the world, and there are people that, you know, scream morality. And these ladies here are some of the best that I have heard and I have seen. So with that, I'm going to welcome you all. So thank you so much for being here. You ladies are like titanium to me. You're just bulletproof, and I love it. As well as the original champions of this whole debacle. So I guess where we're going to start, Kristen, if you'll unmute your mic, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and just give people a little bit about your story and tell them how you got here.
Yeah. My name is Kristen. I'm a nurse in London, Ontario, and I've been working in the NICU for 12 years. And I've just I'd say the last 6 years, when my son was born, I really started to dive into holistic nutrition and food and just wellness and overall well-being. And that became kind of my passion, is holistic health, like sustainability and how we can really, just feel optimal. And then through that, I've just peeled back layers and layers and layers of information about just how to actually, like, I don't know, feel ourselves to be healthy. And I've just noticed that there's been a lot of corruption kind of happening with, watching the pharmaceuticals, watching the propaganda, watching all these things being pushed. And then when the lockdowns and everything happened, I couldn't stand back. I said, as a nurse, as a mother, as a citizen, I couldn't idly sit back and just watch what was happening to the public, because people were just gravely suffering. I was watching kids suffer. I was watching kids, not be able to play with each other. Kids were, like screaming if another child came close to them. I was watching children get raised in fear. And when you're raised in fear, that becomes terror, and prolonged terror becomes trauma. And I just realized that this is like psychological damage is going to be irreversible. So I hosted a freedom rally in London, Ontario, just to really stand up and take a stance and say no more, enough is enough. And with that, speaking out against the narrative, came some pretty harsh consequences on my job. But it led me to all of these women that we're connecting with today. And I think we all come from a different perspective of why we're here and the messages that we want to get across and things that we've seen throughout our career. But I know that there are many more nurses that are coming forward, and we all have a very important message to share about what's going on, about what these lockdowns are doing, the propaganda that's happening with the pharmaceuticals. And yeah, so I'm just excited to be here with everyone and to finally bring light to this darkness and hopefully, shed some truth and get this message out.
Right. Now, you just said you're a NICU nurse, and I know we had spoken before. Talk to me about what's going on in the NICUs with dads, with right? Like, we had a conversation, the dad's not being allowed in. Talk to me about what's happening and how traumatic that is for families right now.
Well, yeah, and it's been really hard to watch. Like, so the birth of your child is supposed to be this amazing, beautiful experience. It also can be very scary depending on what's going on. And mothers that were having a C-section during this time, fathers were not allowed into the OR room. So mothers were going to be in there by themselves having a C-section, having their baby, and they didn't have any support systems. The room was filled with, the doctors and the teams, but not their person. So they were alone. And to me, that was like heartbreaking. And I know there was a couple times where the women would have to go under general anesthetic, so be put right to sleep. And I just thought, oh my gosh, both parents are missing the birth of their child. And no one's there. And I was like, all for the sake of COVID, but there's about 10 other healthcare people in the room, but they couldn't allow the father, the most important person in the room, for the birth of their child. And I just thought, what is happening? And then normally we were there, we're all scrubbed up, and we would take the baby from the team and love them and dry them up and hand them back. But now us nurses weren't allowed in the room either. So the baby was placed on a cold little caught and then wheeled into us and then picked up and brought. So I just thought, like, what is this doing for everyone? The mother, the father, this poor baby that's being placed in this cot, and then we have to wheel them out before we can get them and love them. And if that wasn't traumatic enough, so you have a premature baby, you're in the hospital, so some of them up for over 100 days if there are microprems. And only one support person was allowed in there in 24 hours. So within that whole 24 hours, only one person was allowed at the bedside. And so here you are during this like devastating traumatic experience where you're not sure what's happening with your baby, especially our microprems at 23 weeks. And only one of them are allowed at the bedside with no support, no resources, going through this alone. And some of them lived out of town. So one would be staying with their family out of town, and the other would be staying at our Ronald McDonald houses. But alone and not able to have that support at the bedside where it's needed. And we try our best, obviously, as much as we can, because we want to be there and help the parents. And that's one of my favorite parts about my job, is having that connection with parents. But there's only so much we can do. They need those support persons, and we were kind of denying them from them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Now, you had also told me that they were canceling the essential surgery, or the non-essential surgeries, what they were deeming non-essential, sorry. However, they were still bringing in the circumcisions.
Yeah,
Why,
that was
why is that?
Yeah, well, because that's cash in hand. Because why else, right? Convenient. Because here they are, like, denying all these other surgeries. Like, Sick Kids in Toronto put out a letter saying that there's been a lot of kids that have missed their window for surgeries. So for like cleft palates or other, major surgeries that they needed to have, and they've missed their window. And Sick Kids put a whole article about this. And I know other people as well, like other surgeries and things I'm sure these women can vouch for. So many things are being on hold, but circumcisions within the hospital were still allowed, because the hospital charges money plus the doctor charges money. It's like a double cost when you get it done within the hospital. And it's cash. You have to bring cash. So I don't know. And there's a lot of risk that comes with circumcisions. There can be bleeding and aftercare, but I don't know. Apparently that was still allowed to go on. I found that very interesting, considering everything else that they were not allowing and canceling and putting on hold. But I guess money talks.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. And the other thing we spoke about the other day as well was hypochondria. You made a really, really good point about that. Hypochondria used to be an illness. Am I wrong in saying that?
Yeah, so we're creating a germophobia society, and it's very interesting because hypochondria, we used to say, like, that's like an illness in itself, like, possibly like a mental illness that people would have to try and get help for to overcome their hypochondria. But now it's being encouraged. We are encouraging people to become hypochondriacs, to fear everything, every kind of bacteria, every kind of virus, or every kind of germ. And that is just not the way to live. Like, we are not sterile beings. We've never been designed to be sterile, ever. We are actually made up of more bacteria than we are human cells. So, I mean, if we're fearing all this bacteria, we are literally fearing ourselves. We have a microbiome and a virome. Like, we are made up of viruses. Like, that's our being. This is our makeup. So we're being taught to just fear our entire being of who we are. So we're creating, a society of hypochondriacs that fear everything, including each other, human connection. Like, we're fearing the very thing that makes us humans and makes us thrive is human connection. And we're starting it young within kids, and it's being completely encouraged into adults. And if you don't have human connection, what do you have left?
Mm-hmm. Yep. 100%. Well, thanks, Kristen.
Mm-hmm.
Erin M, let's pass it on to you. Can you introduce yourself to everybody and just give them a little rundown of your story there? Yeah, there you go.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. And like I was just having a quick talk with Amanda before, there's so much to say. I don't know where to start because there's so much wrong and I can't seem to point my finger on where do I want to start. My name is Erin. I've been a nurse in the state of Massachusetts, United States, for over 23 years. And I have been witness to the slow deterioration of the medical care system. And we come here together because we are compassionate, competent, caring, and confident. I have spoken up against the lockdowns, the mandates, the mistreatment, the tyranny, and the unethical medical system. Nurses are the eyes, the ears, the messengers of the doctors in our communities. We have seen pain in our patients' eyes and suffering caused by our own medical community, and it's felt nothing short of a betrayal of trust, a betrayal of our education, a betrayal of our very system we were educated through. Some of us have been fired, and this year, after 9 years of being with the same company, and I've had beautiful relationships with my patients, I decided to walk away because my company approved a drug that wasn't FDA approved for the treatment of the coronavirus, but they gave it a pass for emergency use authorization to give in a patient's home that was simply unsafe. They said we had to have albuterol inhaler, and they targeted elderly in long-term care. My nurse friends, I asked you this. In an emergency, try teaching an elderly person how to use an albuterol inhaler. This is completely irresponsible. And I simply couldn't deal with it anymore, the disrespect for human life. But now today, I have come together with these beautiful nurses. We come united, not divided. We no longer stand together apart. We stand together in peace and unified. Right now, truth is what we know. And because we understand the truth so deeply, we fight for truth to rise up and let itself be known through our voices in order for healing to start to take place within each human being and human spirit. The difference you see in the nurses you are looking at right now is that we see truth and we see corruption. And we can't stand it anymore when we see truth and it's not being blessed and it's not being used and corruption is taking over. It is just nothing short of traumatic for a nurse who sees truth. As a nurses, it is our job to protect our patients when they are vulnerable and weak. For when they are weak, they need someone strong to hold them up in the most troubling times. We right now are witnessing history, and many moons ago, Florence Nightingale held the lamp in the darkness in order to bring peace through chaos. And it is our turn to hold the lamp for all in the dark corners of the world. Right now, we hold the lamp and the lamp burns on. As I said, I've been a nurse going on 24 years, and I've been witness to the slow deterioration within the medical system where leaders have become compromised. Patients are blindly led and informed consent is completely taken for granted. It's been difficult to be an ethical nurse in an unethical medical system. And unfortunately, I walked away from my job this year after 9 long years, and I am a home infusion nurse. So I have had beautiful relationships with my patients. I've known one patient since he was 2, and I just left him at the age of 13. Another patient, I've known him since he was 10, and I just left him and he's in his 20s. It was extremely difficult for me to leave my patients. But the way that they were wanting us to work in this coronavirus atmosphere was just simply unethical, and I could no longer do it. We're putting our patients at risk. We're putting our nurses at risk. I want to add, and I don't want to take up everybody's time, our nurse leaders are compromised. So the American Nurses Association, that I don't affiliate with, I don't pay for newsletters or magazines, but they randomly sent me an email, and it's a 3-part video series on why nurses should feel confident in taking the COVID vaccine and also feel confident in telling patients to take it. Well, I decided to do a little research on the person who presented this video. And she's a PhD RN. She has a master's in nursing. And she sat on the immunization committee to make the immunization records for adolescents. And who else sat on that committee? The head of the pharmaceutical company, Sanofi, the doctor. And I looked and I kept searching. She won awards for immunizations through the American Nurses Association. So our leaders are compromised. We can no longer trust our leaders. We can't look up to them anymore. Do you know who our leaders are going to be now? Us. We are now the leaders because we see truth and we feel connection. Now, when you watch her present this video, she is like a robot just reading a script. There is absolutely no connection with the audience. She's been lost a long time ago. And that's why we need to leave her. And we need to stand up now and be the leaders. And we need to connect the audience. And we need to show people truth because we see the truth in your eyes. And we feel it deeply. And we are here to help. I don't want any more people to live in fear. I have patients. My patient she has COPD, and she went to the store wearing a mask. And she told me, Erin, I'm so short of breath. I can't stand it anymore. And I said to her, you are exempt. And she said, I know. But she's so full of fear that she's going to get sick and die. Do you see what we've done to people? We've got to get people off mainstream media. What they are promoting is just lies. It's all lies. Don't listen to it. Stop paying for cable. Now, I'm going to say something. It's not going to sound very nice, but they are targeting obese and people with comorbidities. Who are those people? They're people who are victims of the medical system, and they know you are weak. They know when you're obese and you're not taking care of yourself, that you are in a weak state, and therefore you're vulnerable to doing whatever they say. So this is a give and take relationship. We have to take responsibility for our own health. Our government is not responsible for our health. I am not responsible for your health. You are not responsible for my health. We have got to get ourselves healthy. The science is just one branch of medicine. There are many branches of medicine, but we have to be responsible for our health. One more thing. I felt like quitting today. I was just at that point. And then my sister always calls me with the updates because I don't pay for the news. I don't watch the news. And she put the phone to the TV where my governor in Massachusetts shut down all industries to 25% capacity. 10 people in your house at Christmas. And that lit a fire under my butt because I am so angry right now because there's no justification for this lockdown at all. I don't want to take up the whole space, so I'm going to stop there.
Oh, Erin, that's great.
I could go on and on. I'm sorry.
Well, I am just so glad you didn't quit today. I can tell you because the world needs more Erins. And speaking of Erins, we're going to go down to another warrior Erin. A lot of you have seen this lady. She was on the front lines in New York at the Elmhurst Hospital. I'm correct with the Elmhurst thing, right? Sorry, I'm in Canada, guys,
Yeah.
so I'm trying to keep track of our hospitals and your hospitals and see how we're all working together. But Erin, can you please let everybody know who you are and yeah, your story and how you ended up here as well?
Sure. So my name is Erin Olszewski, and I live in Florida. And I guess kind of all of us nurses are kind of accidental activists. We all kind of saw things that we didn't agree with. We signed up to help people, and being in our profession the way it is right now, we're not helping anybody. So long story short, I've been a nurse for just about 10 years. Prior to that, I was in the military, served in the Army. I was in Iraq for 1.5 years. So I love our country and I love what we stand for. And after I took a travel nursing position in New York during the height of the pandemic, and it was a red flag immediately on my first shift. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, they were essentially murdering these patients, and nobody would listen. The more you would talk to other nurses and doctors, they just kind of went with it. And so, me being me, I guess, I contacted an attorney in New York, and we decided to record it, because any nurse that was saying anything prior to that was getting fired. They silence us. They silence the truth. And, as a nurse, like, we're the voices for the voiceless, especially when they're being put on ventilators and they can't even speak for themselves, especially when there's no families allowed in these rooms. I mean, it was the perfect storm for corruption. And, I like to say it was literally an assembly line to a body bag, and everybody just thought it was okay. And I said it before, and I say it to this day. I feel like we are literally living in the Twilight Zone, and you're looking around and you're wondering, how in the world does everybody think that this is just okay? And then I started looking for other nurses, after my expose came out, and like, you know what, this can't end now. Like, this isn't the end. So I wanted to unite, and so here we are. And, these are a lot of the frontline nurses. We're having a global frontline nurses summit on January 9th in Tampa. There'll be a website, globalfrontlinenurses.com. It's not live yet. Hopefully later today or tomorrow it will be live. And we are going to tell the truth to the world. We're going to stop the corruption. We're going to restore ethics, compassion, care into the healthcare community. And honestly, between all of us, and I'm sure there's going to be a whole lot more of us, moving forward with this, we're just going to end it. We're going to make it right by our patients, and especially by the people that have lost their lives unnecessarily, during this whole entire COVID scandal, I like to call it. But you know what? It is what it is. A lot of us have been fired, blacklisted, made to look crazy. But as the days go on, news stories start to come out, and it's everything that we've been saying all along. So, every day we're becoming a little bit more vindicated, and we're looking less crazy. And I think more and more people are realizing that, and, they're questioning a lot more, especially with this COVID vaccine coming out. People need to ask questions. They need to be inquisitive. They deserve the truth. And that's why, I'm here, and that's why everybody else, right now, all of us nurses standing our ground, doing what nurses are supposed to do. We're advocating for our patients to do the right thing. And our healthcare industry right now is putting politics over people. They're putting money over people. They're putting everything ahead of actual patient care, because healthy people don't make them money. And that's disgusting. And it needs to stop, and it needs to literally be looked at on a much bigger level. So I think that we're going to be the change. Nurses are the most, trusted profession, at least in the United States, I believe, across the world. And the healthcare system cannot run without nurses. It just can't. I mean, the nurses are with patients 99% of the time. The doctor, comes in, prescribes, hey, how you doing? And half the time, we have to correct the doctors to make sure that they don't kill the patients. And nurses that don't even maybe agree with what we're doing right now will agree with that. There's so many near misses that, that's our job. So yeah, that's kind of my story in a nutshell, but I'd do it all over again, if I could.
Yep. Some people have the heart, and you've got a fire, and you wrote a book too about it, didn't you?
Yeah. Yep. I wanted to get the word out. My expose came out. I have live video. And then I wrote a book because look at what they're doing. They're censoring us hard. They're censoring the truth. I just had a post about that nurse, passing out after getting the vaccine. I have 6 fact checks on my post.
Yep.
6. And I'm in contact with one of the fact checkers from USA Today, and I'm asking her to fact check, things. And she's like, that I'd like to know, what's going on? Did this nurse, did she pass away? Did she not? They don't know,
Yeah.
So it's,
and here's my take on this, because, I don't know if this is right or not, but usually if she was still around, and I hope to God she is, if she was still around, these manufacturers would be all over this, making the crazy anti-vaxxers look as dumb as humanly possible right now. Right? But it's been crickets. It's been silence. Because that never happens.
Yeah, we're right. You can't deny it. I don't know why they would actually pick a nurse if she did have, episodes of syncope, fainting. Why would they pick a nurse to give her the vaccine at that time? I mean, that's why I can't follow that story. And, a lot of people don't know this, but these manufacturers of these vaccines, and it's not just the COVID vaccine, they're liability free. And that's the same thing that happened in the hospitals all across the United States, all across the world, liability free. It was a free for all. And there's a lot of people that are not ethical, especially when they're being backed by big pharmaceutical companies, big government. They're not going to do the right thing. Why would they? They get paid a lot of money to do the wrong thing, and they're okay with it, and the same thing happens with the vaccine manufacturers. Why would they want to put out a safe vaccine when it doesn't really matter if they get sued or not? They're not going to be liable. That's crooked.
Yep.
I mean, that's literally unheard of. And that needs, that obviously needs to change. And hopefully when enough of us unite, which I think that we're pretty powerful already, but this isn't the end. This is just the beginning.
100%. 100%. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Sarah, how are you doing? It's your turn.
I'm good.
Thanks for joining us. Can you just give everybody an introduction on yourself and let us know how you fit into all of this fun?
Okay, so my name is Sarah Shijunian. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I graduated as an RPN in 2004, and I've been working in a nursing home for the greater part of my career, and also been working in the community, mostly with kids. I've been a union steward for the last 5 years and had become a chief steward in the last 3, proudly standing up for justice in the workplace. In 2017, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which was the catalyst to my life-changing actions. I refused to accept the prognosis of the long-term disability along with the prescription medications and started my own natural healing journey instead. I decided to get help from the Gatehouse, which is a safe place for survivors of sexual abuse. And I was able to get completely clean. I lost 60 pounds, got rid of most of my fibromyalgia symptoms, and I have learned how to effectively manage my complex post-traumatic stress disorder. My transformation was so outstanding that I decided to give back and become a facilitator at the Gatehouse myself. So at the time, I became kind of obsessed with mindfulness and neuroplasticity, and I've done a lot of extensive research on psychology and trauma. which propelled me to initiate this organization called Lighting Up Dark Corners to empower survivors and to help them heal and rise. So I've always been known to be the voice of the voiceless, and I intend to keep it that way. And so the lockdowns have been very triggering for me, and I wasn't able to close my eyes to all the harm that and the suffering that was caused by them. And so I let my frustrations out and my concerns about the testing and the extreme outbreak measures out online, which ended up getting me instantly terminated. So I decided to channel my rage and put it to something positive. So I spoke out at the protests, and I founded Nurses Against Lockdowns, not only to support nurses, but also to unite us, organize, educate, speak up, and fight back. And that's pretty much my story.
Amazing. Amazing. So I'm just going to ask you this because you are long-term care as well, but are the lockdown measures working in this area for the poor people in these homes? Like what's your feedback on that?
Actually, one of my concerns, so I'll go ahead right into that. I've been extremely concerned about the isolation that residents have been put through and how they have been separated from their loved ones for the last 9 months, which has caused for many to deteriorate at a faster than normal pace, a lot of failure to thrive, and even for some, death of a broken heart. As if that's not enough, now we're being told that residents so I don't know if you guys know, but in the nursing home, we get tested every 2 weeks. At some places weekly, it's different everywhere. But if any tests become positive, public health has now made it that outbreaks are like, they can decide, they decide what's an outbreak. So it could be 1 or 2 staff people. And if it's like kitchen or housekeeping, they can shut down the whole building. And what happens then is that all the residents are kept in their rooms. They can't go for their meals, literally isolated in their rooms for up to 2 weeks. And then the testing starts again to make sure no one's positive. And so it's ridiculous, and it's solitary confinement, and it's really bad for them. And so another concern that comes up is that now we're being told that residents and the vulnerable will be the first to get this unsafe experimental vaccine. And so that's a huge concern. And we heard Dr. Kelly Moore, the Associate Director of the Immunization Action Coalition, state for us not to be alarmed if 1 or multiple people die in nursing homes within a day or 2 of getting the vaccine. And I found this to be absolutely outrageous. Like, we shut down the entire world to protect these vulnerable people, and now we're going to inject them with something that might kill them to protect them? The only thing I have to say is I strongly recommend for those who can get their parents and their grandparents out of these homes at this point to please bring them home. It'll make a world of difference to their well-being.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Sarah. Wow, it's heartbreaking, and it's so heartbreaking to watch. And I know when I go down to some of these protests in Toronto as well, the march goes right by one of the long-term care homes, and I am telling you, there's probably about 100 windows on that street as you're walking by, and 70 to 85% of those windows is filled with these beautiful souls. They've got signs holding up saying, "Help me," they're waving, they're just blowing kisses. It is heartbreaking. And these people lived their life, and some of them gave their life for our freedoms. And this is how we're going to treat them. We're going to treat them like infants at this stage of the game. Like,
Exactly.
They're grown adults. If they want to spend the time with their family, it is up to them to decide. It is not for Doug Ford or whoever the state governor is, or, And for those of you that don't know, we are speaking with Nurses and doctors from America as well as Canada. So we're kind of doing a little comparison as we go. So wrapping that up. Alex, how are you?
Hi, good. Thanks so much for
Thanks
having
for
me on.
coming.
It's wonderful to be here with all of these fellow nurses. So like Erin, I'm actually coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts, USA. I am a second career nurse, so I have a bachelor's first in business, and then I went back and got my BSN RN, so I'm a registered nurse here in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. I worked several years on an adult medical, surgical, orthopedic oncology floor in a hospital, and I spent the past 4 years as a full-time school nurse. So I'm coming with a different perspective, mainly focused on our children, and not only the children that I care for in our schools, but my own. So, you know, just to preface, in nursing school, I learned the immunization schedule and how to give a shot. I learned nothing about the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, that the US Supreme Court removed liability from vaccine manufacturers, that vaccine injury actually occurs and is often unrecognized, and had never read an ingredient list or full manufacturer insert before I began to research this topic on my own. And that is, you know, from school. I have an almost 3-year-old son who has a significant medical history. So he is the reason why I was led down this path. He has had several brain surgeries. He's had a history of seizure. He was also born premature. So I'm familiar with the NICU, like Kristen talks about. We spent a combined 84 days in a Boston NICU. And he's had brain infection. So I was, like any nurse, vaccinating him with the CDC recommended schedule. Grudgingly, I felt uneasy about a lot of it, specifically because I knew he was receiving more than I did, even in my lifetime. And the timing was so early in relation to his premature birth. It really just left me very uncomfortable to know that he actually received his 2-month dose vaccines before he was even due to be born. And that is approved here in the United States. That's what they will just follow. So I had concerns. I was constantly kind of, you know, questioning doctors or just asking. I needed reassurance to know that I was doing the right thing. And everyone always just kind of pushed me along and said, yep, you know, definitely, even especially because he's premature. There was no kind of discussion or conversations about what would be really, you know, particular to his medical case. It was just, here's the schedule. Yep, we're going to do it all. So finally, I really do feel it was a sign from God to look further. I finally just went to the FDA site and read the ingredient list and went to the manufacturers and saw and read all of the vaccine inserts. And what I found was alarming. I had no knowledge, what ingredients were used, if they're comfortable with my beliefs. And even in reading the inserts, I actually found that he received an immunization that had not been proven safe or effective in his case, because he received, basically he received a vaccine in a study period for his age and health history. So this had not been shared with me, nor was I given the option to decline without pressure from his pediatrician. So that's human rights. That's basic, Nuremberg code. We need to be able to know and decide whether or not we want to participate in a medical study. I also found specific warnings for certain vaccines in relation to his history. So patients with prior brain injury or history of seizure, even family history of seizure. And none of these warnings warranted medical exemptions for my son. But this information I doubt was going to be shared with me either. So I was never given the opportunity to kind of make a risk benefit decision for his medical care. And that was the most troubling part of it, because I realized no one was looking out for my son, for him as an individual. And he's not, every child is unique, but he specifically had, reason for us to take pause and to kind of make decisions together. A doctor, patient, parent, that's a relationship that needs to be held in high standards. So I realized at that point, I was his, advocate, and they're not going to tell us these things unless I was going to look myself. I also found, like I said, many ingredients I was not comfortable injecting my son with and had been unaware of their use. One vaccine actually even listed E. coli, which is the pathogen that he almost could have died from. That is what was, throughout his brain. He had an E. coli infection in his brain. So that's not to say that this is because of vaccines or everything is related and caused by vaccines, but more to the point that ingredients should be more available for review before a patient accepts and receives a medical treatment. That's critical. And so the further I looked, the more I learned and had questions to ask. And kind of going along with this, we are being silenced. When I presented these questions to our pediatrician, he had no further information to share with me. And we were actually kicked out of our pediatrician's office for not adhering to the vaccine schedule at 2 years old. So my experience with my son has opened my eyes so much. And I feel I'm becoming a true advocate for his health and well-being. And it's led me to kind of speak up for other parents. And so that was my, individual case with my son. But now to kind of talk about being a school nurse. So in Massachusetts and in many states in the United States, there are proposed legislation that removes or restricts the rights of parents, patients for vaccine exemptions. This all comes alongside additions to the immunization schedule required for children to attend school. So loss of rights, lack of informed consent, increasing medical treatments, alongside fear-mongering, coercion, labeling, and withholding of education does not seem ethical by any means, especially as a nurse. So I spoke up this past spring to my school nurse leader. As Erin mentioned, our leaders are tarnished as well. I spoke up about how the term anti-vaxxer is derogatory and a negative label, and that can lead to bullying. And we, as nurses, we're trained to call out bullying, discrimination. We had a whole training class on to not be xenophobic to Asians in relation to the COVID virus. But when I talked about, anti-vaxxer being a derogatory label, and that we should not be using this in a professional setting because we have children with valid exemptions at school, I received no response to my email and was informed several weeks later that my position was not going to be renewed in the fall. So I am also not working right now. So that is kind of my story. It's twofold. Just the discredit and lack of discussion that's given to parents and patients that question vaccines is not supportive to our human rights. Our children today suffer from many chronic illnesses, behavioral issues, mental health concerns, and more. Many are taking daily prescription medications to treat those issues. And I feel this is a true epidemic in our country that needs to be addressed, and light needs to be shown on that. And if no one speaks up for our children and ourselves, I fear what's to come as vaccinations are added to the recommended schedule and our patient and human rights disappear. So I am here to speak out for my son and for other children, but we must always promote true informed consent and medical choice, and most especially when risk is present and or when the participant would be part of a study. So with the coronavirus vaccine, we need to be made aware that at this point you are participating in a study, and that's totally fine if someone wants to do that, but we need to know that we are participating if we are going to go ahead and move forward with the vaccine. So I don't want to live in a society where medical treatment determines whether we get to participate. I don't want to have to, show a card to travel or to go food shopping or anything. That's, confidential medical history that needs to be supported and for the individual. So we need to stop the propaganda and social pressure. I think it's alarming to me to see nurses showing what their decision was, because my life is not your life. And if, a reaction was to happen, that's something that individual lives with, no one else. So we need to stop labeling and gaslighting, and we must support each other to allow these discussions to take place and to support medical freedom for ourselves and for our children.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Just a question. As a school immunization nurse, what was, or I guess I should, as a general in your school, let's just say, what do people know about VAERS? Like, is it discussed? Is it filled out? Like, do they use
No,
it even when they know it's an adverse reaction? Like,
oh, do they know whether or not it's been an injury, you're saying, from vaccines, or do we know about our rights about exemptions to immunizations at school?
when they see an adverse reaction, do they automatically think, oh, I should go and put this into VAERS? Or is it like, oh, no, maybe tomorrow, or oh, let's just play this off and forget about it?
Yeah. No, so we don't give vaccines at school. So
okay, we do in Canada.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. No, it's very rare. I'd say it's very rare for school nurses to be giving immunizations at school. We did this year. It's a new mandate in Massachusetts that is requiring every child to get the flu shot every year now. So this is a new addition to the required schedule. So I have heard that there have been flu clinics where I believe a school nurse or somebody contracted from, say, Rite Aid or CVS, Walgreens would come in and administer immunizations after school hours. So we don't usually give immunizations ourselves as a school nurse. I'm responsible for taking the health history and tracking and making sure that our students are up to date or have a valid exemption on file. So I am just kind of more well-versed in what the requirements are and how to support our students in both flights who have exemptions or are vaccinated to the schedule.
Right.
But it's an interesting thing that, this year alone, we've added 3 additional inoculations to the required schedule for school. And many parents, I was speaking up even in the winter, we need to notify parents about what's coming for the fall. And I just feel like everything is hush hush. We don't want to, alarm the parents. We don't want to tell them ahead of time. It's kind of like we just notify them after the fact, oh, this is now required. When many parents are even unaware that they didn't even have this vaccine themselves. And it was kind of created in 2000, some of them were created in like 2007. And we are now for the first time giving it to children at a younger age that have never received it before.
Wow.
So,
well, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Wow. We're going to get into some questions after we get through introducing everybody, guys, for those of you watching. So let's just, hi, Nicole.
Hi, I had myself on mute so you wouldn't hear me like typing away in here.
That's okay. Thank you. Can you just introduce yourself to everybody here and let them know how you got here to this wonderful group of nurses?
So my name is Nicole Serotech. Most people know me from that incredibly foul-mouthed, very snot-filled viral video back in May, where I went to NYC to help with the COVID pandemic, and there was so much medical negligence, and that I put that video out begging for help because all the authorities that you're supposed to contact wouldn't help me because everything was locked down. And I sent that video out thinking foolishly that, the cavalry would come in and everyone would be like, oh my gosh, what's going on? What's happening to these people? That's not what happened. And so I've, ever since then, have met Erin Marie, as you guys know, who really just supported me in coming back out and helping to continue to fight for patients. Because I think if I hadn't met her, honestly, I don't know if I would continue to have fought. I think I probably would have just laid down and died like everybody else does. They just kind of roll over. And I'm like, you're right. We do need to do this. We need to fight for these people and make sure that they're getting good quality care. And that's what we've been doing ever since. And I apologize. I'm in my car. I'm trying to get some work done.
That's okay. No worries. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. I know I watched a bit about when you were on the High Wire with Dell there, and you were talking about the patient care. what can you tell our viewers about some of the atrocities that you did see? And I know it's awful to keep bringing it up, but I don't think people understand what needs to be fixed here, because this is broken, and it's not just in the States. We are broken worldwide.
Yes.
And it's up to you guys with the hearts that you have. You know, you're going to be the leaders of this, and it's not going to look the way it used to look. And we're going to make sure of that.
I hope so, because that was scary.
Yeah. What can you tell people that I don't think they have a clue about?
You know, I know it's really hard to explain, because I like to tell people, because everyone thought I was just some bright-eyed, bushy-tail nurse that came from some small, backwoods town, and I just wasn't prepared for what I was going to see, and that's actually incorrect. I have traveled actually all over the world dealing with viruses and outbreaks, and going to refugee camps and dealing with natural disasters and things like that as my previous life as a biochemist and then as a nurse. And I'm also classically trained as an ICU nurse and a flight nurse. So I was prepared to see some of the worst of the worst. I was prepared to make hard decisions based off like the FEMA protocols for triage, because they said, the news said it was so bad. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so bad. I was prepared. I was even like reviewing my FEMA protocols and things like that. And I get there, and yes, it is chaotic. And, I felt like I was the only one kind of comfortable walking into the hospital. Everyone's like, ooh, and I'm like, I got N95s, I got masks, I can do just about anything. This is not radioactive. And we're sitting there, and it's very apparent that nobody's worked with ventilators before. And I don't know what most people thought when they were walking in there, but like, what did you expect? Like, we get there and nobody knows how to manage a ventilator. And so when they're asking us, hey, what do you feel comfortable doing? I'm the only one that can raise my hand to everything. Nobody asked about the dialysis machine. So that's, I can't do that. I've always admitted to that. They're like, can you run a ventilator? I'm like, yeah, no problem. I do it all the time in like flight nursing. My paramedics have taught me very well, like what I need to do. And he's like, can you read an ABG? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, can you intubate? I'm like, yeah, I'm a flight nurse. They make sure I know that stuff. We can't just like land at a trauma and be like, oh no, sorry, I don't know how to do that. You need to know everything you need to know to take care of the patient. And I get there, and everyone is just like, they get dispersed, and you're just running from like code to code to code. I've never seen so many people freaking code in my life. I mean, honestly, the number of codes I've ran in New York is probably more than my cumulative professional like time, which I've been a nurse for a decade. And it's very obvious that people didn't really know what they were doing. There were a lot of good people there. I got put on a unit that they kind of warned me nobody knew how to manage ventilators and basic ventilatory care, and that they would most likely be mean to me. And I'm like, okay, no big deal. Like, I'm never going to see these people again. I'm like, I guess until my face ends up everywhere. I get there, and nobody's on end title. Like, I'm like, is anyone switching over the circuits? Did anybody remember to feed these people? Like, remember, they wanted 30,000 ventilators for these people. Where were the 30,000 feeding pumps to feed these people on these ventilators? I mean, they ran out of all the restraints. They literally had some people taped to the bed, or like, they're like, I'm like, well, she doesn't have restraints on. They're like, oh, just go get some gauze and tie them down. I'm like, I know we're in a pandemic, but like, there's certain things like I'm willing to cowboy together and MacGyver. But there's certain things I'm like, that's a little if, and it's very apparent that people don't know what they're doing. A lot of the pumps were misprogrammed. So the medications you're thinking you're putting in the correct dose and everything like that, and it's not the correct dose. And I'm like, man, your fentanyl should not be running at like 1,000 micrograms. I didn't even think that was possible. Or they ran propofol for 20 days straight, and I'm like, has anybody heard of propofol syndrome? Or like I could never find a manometer, which looks like a little blood pressure, like pumpy pump, and it checks the pressure in the tubes. Never saw one of those ever. And I'm like, who's checking the pressures in these cuffs? No wonder everyone's like getting like a secondary like aspiration type like a pneumonia when all their secretions are like just going into their throats and into their lungs. No wonder we're causing secondary infections. And I saw medical residents who they come over here and yes, they're doctors according to some type of equivalency, but I'm like, you guys don't know how to run ACLS. You guys don't even know like BLS. And I'm like, you can't just do compressions on someone who has a pulse of 40 and is still blinking at you. I mean, if he's like trying to push you off him, that should be an indication that you're doing something wrong. And I mean, one girl, when I went up to another unit to get like some like equipment, she comes running out of the room and she's like, my patient's dying, I don't know what to do. And I go in there and like her ventilator is set at 6 breaths per minute. And I'm like, what? And you're trying to crank this up. And I'm like, go get help. And you're trying to manage that. But I mean, how long have you been breathing like that? And that's why he's starting to code. She was a new grad nurse. I don't even think she had a temporary license yet. And they made this executive order where like nursing students and medical students could just work as full-fledged nurses and doctors. And because they had such a poor concept of what we do as healthcare professionals, as nurses and doctors, they just thought, hey, we can just throw any nurse and doctor in there and it's going to work. And I'm like, I took orders from a podiatrist and I took orders from a dentist and an optometrist and a pediatrician under like an adult unit. And I'm like, what? No wonder what you're telling me doesn't make any sense. No, we don't do that. Like, what are you talking about?
Wow.
And nobody knew how to do an EKG. And I'm like, what? Like, these are certain basic things that you should know to do in order to step into the critical care setting if you're like gonna be there for that. And I mean, at least the news told us like people were on ventilators, and everything that comes with the ventilator, you should kind of know what to do. And so you've got all these people. I mean, I was there with a school nurse and I'm like, well, when was the last time you were in the ICU? She's like, oh, I've never been in the ICU. I graduated and I was a school nurse. And I'm like, oh, how long ago? Oh, 20 years. And I'm like, so you've never been in the hospital ever? Or OB nurses. And I'm like, do you like, see, I lose my words every time when I think about this. Like, I mean, I can help deliver a baby, but I'm like, I'm not an OB nurse. Like, if there's me and an OB nurse and you need your baby delivered, I would be like, here, OB nurse. And I mean, I pat your shoulder. Do you need your sweat wiped from your head? Whatever you need, because you're the professional right now. Like, whatever I can do to help you. And and then so you tell people, hey, you need to put your patient on end-tidal, or hey, you need to do this, you need to do that. And man, they're like, you just think you know everything. You're a narcissist. You think you're just so smart. And I'm like, that's actually a standard of care. Like, you can't have anything below this level is not acceptable. We need to be at this level. And we did. Like, when we were there, when we were on the bus, I'm like, because I've been in bad situations before, because I've traveled and I've gone to outbreak areas. I'm like, hey, what are we doing on equipment? And I'm like, hey, what do we have for Fent and Prop and Sucks and who's intubating and how many vents we got and what are the pumps we're using? And I'm like, oh, no, it's good. And I even have a video of it. They're like, no, it's not that bad, blah, blah, blah. I mean, in the beginning, it may have been really, really bad, like the news said, but if they're offering me an hour and a half lunch break, and I'm like, what? I haven't had a lunch break in God knows how many years.
Wow.
So, I mean, but everyone's just like, they just kept at it, and good for them for continuing to want to get help, but nobody really knew what they were doing. I mean, they told everybody that, once we walked on the unit, that everybody was a DNR automatically. And I'm like, that man over there's like 30. He has really good chances of surviving if we code him. Does his family know that? I mean, I saw one doctor call, like, I guess a family had called and he was at the station and he was like, they were explaining about the man's family, like how he was critical, but like a good critical, the better side of critical. And he was just talking, explaining, looking up labs and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, that's the first time I've seen somebody talk to a family member. And then I go look and I'm like, wow, that's not even that patient. That's a woman in that bed and that's an old lady. I'm like, does the family know that the patient's dead? Because he was dead. He'd been dead for a couple days now. And I mean, because I went, I'm like, hey, doc, do you know that you just gave the family report, but the guy's been dead since Tuesday? And he's like, oh. And I'm like, you might want to call him back and let him know he's dead.
Wow.
And yeah, there was another patient where, you know, a lot of times the way the lab values start to go, we can see death coming. We can almost even approximate it. I'm like, we've got like 12 hours with this poor man. He's not going to make it. And there's nothing I can do. And I was telling the residents, and I'm like, hey, this man's not going to make it. I'm maxed out on everything. His kidneys are shutting down. There's no dialysis machines because remember, they didn't ask for dialysis machines. I mean, and who would run them? We didn't ask for dialysis nurses. And he's like, okay. And then he goes and tells the family that the patient is dead. And I'm like, he's not dead. He was alive. Didn't you see the monitor? His vital signs are there. His heart rate is there. I'm like, he will die in a couple hours, but not right now. He's like, I just told them that he's dead. And I'm like, I didn't tell you to tell the family he was dead. I mean, I literally said probably in about 10 hours he's going to die, you know? And I'm like, remember, I told you to ask them if they wanted us to code him or not.
Oh.
He's like, well, who's going to call them back and explain this? And I'm like, you, because you're the doctor and you did that. I got to go save this other guy. And I'm just like, why would you call the family and tell him he's dead when he's alive in the bed? Why would you tell another family that the patient is alive, but he's been dead for several days? I mean, it was so out of control, crazy with zero organization that I saw it coming because I've seen in refugee camps when there's outbreaks and stuff like that, like how are you going to identify people? Because one of the components with ARDS is when your kidneys start to shut down, you'll start to swell with fluid. So they didn't have their armbands on them and they would tape it to the front of the door because remember, they didn't want you going into those rooms. And so I took my Sharpie and I wrote their name and date of birth on her leg because I'm like, man, if something happens, because look at this clusterfuck, I want people to at least know who this is, you know? People have certain religious customs that they need to honor. The person doesn't go on to the next stage of their afterlife. And I'm like, that would be horrible if I didn't do everything I could to help that person, you know? Afterlife for a lot of people is more important than the life they live now. And sure enough, they had 9 unidentified bodies in the morgue. There's comes up on our little texting stream. They're like, hey, has anybody had anybody die in the past couple days? Because they don't know who these people are. I still have a copy of it. I took a screenshot before they cut me out of the thread. And I'm like, how do you just lose bodies? How do you lose them? So then the nurse manager for the night shift is coming around being like, hey, did any of your people die? Would you mind going down there and looking and see if you know who they are?
Wow.
I mean, these are people. This isn't a sack of potatoes. This isn't like, oh, I'm sorry, you didn't want tomatoes on your burger. These are living people, and I just never expected to see the disregard for medicine and blatant disregard for common sense for medical practices. And when I was there, and there's many more videos other than that viral video that, because I was FaceTiming, Facebook Living to all my family and friends back home before everybody abandoned me and telling them what was going on so that they can kind of know, because we're in the middle of nowhere. So I'm like, hey, just so you guys know, because a lot of them are nurses, this is what's happening here, protect the community and stuff like that. And I kept saying, this is America. We don't do this here. We're not without our problems, but we don't do this kind of stuff where we just don't care who you are. We're just going to starve you to death. I went into another unit because nobody was bringing supplies. You had to track them down in the hospital. So now I have to leave my ventilated patients unsupervised just to go get a filter or something like that I know that they needed. And I go there and there's this poor little, she's got to be maybe Cambodian or Pacific Islander or something, this old lady. And she's reaching, her hands were just on the tray of her overbed table. And I'm like, man, that poor old lady, she's not going to make it. You can see. And sitting on her tray was her breakfast tray. Like, not even set up. Nobody opened up the milk. Nobody like put butter on her toast or anything like that. I don't know if it was toast, but there was food there. And like, nobody prepped it. Like, maybe she wants salt and pepper. Come on, people. Be human. And anyway, and I'm like, she's gonna die. And you know what? It was 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and that was her breakfast tray from the previous day. So I gotta ask you, where was her lunch and dinner tray? Has nobody gone in there to check on her if that's her like 7 to 8 a.m. breakfast tray?
And
And
that's
it's
where
2 or 3 in the morning the next day?
Yeah.
And then I went up there another time to like, because I knew that there was like a stash of like electrodes or something like that. And she was dead. She was gone. New patient in the bed. And I'm like, I'm not surprised. Did you guys freaking starve her? Deny her fluids? Oh, because she couldn't feed herself? You're just going to let her die? Like, I mean, she wasn't even on a vent. She was a COVID patient, not even on a vent, not even on oxygen. I mean, not bad enough to be in an ICU.
And that's what we've come to. That's what we've
and we're just going to starve them to death.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but when they make the mistake, when they harm somebody, like when a nurse gave the wrong insulin, you know what? Oh, they died of COVID. No, you died because somebody gave you the wrong insulin. Or you died because somebody put the vasopressin up to the maximum level because they didn't know how to manage vasopressin, and you had a stroke and blew your brains out.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that stuff more, but I just want to introduce Karen because I want to get to the question portion.
I'm going to mute myself.
No worries. Hi, Dr. Karen. How are you? Hold. Can we get you off mute here? Let me see. I'll see if I can.
I think I did it. Did I do it?
You did it. You did it. Welcome. How are you?
You know what? After hearing all these stories, I'm totally famished. I've heard them before.
Yeah.
I don't know how your listeners are feeling, but I'm overwhelmed.
Right. And there's a lot of reaction going on, ladies.
Oh, my
very
goodness.
receptive to the truth you're shining today. So again, thank you. I can't thank you enough. But Dr. Karen, it's your turn. So if you want to introduce yourself to everybody and tell everybody how you managed to get in here as well.
So my name is Karen. I've been a nurse since 1982. All of my graduate work, including my PhD, is not in nursing. It's in psychology. I research combined physiological and psychological processes, breastfeeding, birth, transition to parenting. But my heart always stayed in nursing. And all the courses that I taught in university, I always told my students that I'm a nurse first. And that's what I feel in my heart. Nursing gives us the background to care about people, to be evidence-based, to be ethical. And during my career, I have seen a lot of unethical events. I was a client advocate who spoke up, was sanctioned. Pharmaceutical companies, people are not aware of how strong they are, especially in my area, an area of breastfeeding, birth. So that's my background. That's who I was before this started. And when this began, I heard about this terrible virus. Okay, I believed it. But then I started asking questions. And the first thing was, I noticed that they're only talking about reducing the spread of a virus. But there's other multiple things that affect people, other conditions. So I wanted to know, did they do a multiple variable, meaning multiple things that affect people? Did they look at the other events that affect people? Did they do a multivariable risk-benefit analysis to ensure that the lockdown, social isolation, one of the most dangerous things you can do to a human being, masking, it's much different to wear a mask in a surgical theater than in the public. So I started asking, where's the multiple variable risk benefit analysis? There's no evidence that there ever was.
Nope.
And that's important. Again, I want to emphasize that the virus is only one. This virus is only one of the multiple pathogens that still exist today. They haven't disappeared. Multiple conditions. We still have epidemics of breast cancer and all other conditions. And none of these were entered into the into the equation, like a mathematical equation, to see if lockdown, for example, was safe and so on. And one of the problems with not doing a multiple variable risk-benefit analysis is that we become unethical. And that's what has happened here. Our health officials are obligated, because they're health care professionals, to an ethical code. They are obligated to fulfill their ethical code. And we have 4 foundational principles that are shared but interpreted differently by each profession depending on the scope of practice. And these are autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, which is do no harm, and justice, which is health equity. Every time I speak, a phone rings. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right. Now, I'm going to start with beneficence. And beneficence means do good, right? We don't just make sure that we don't do harm. We also make sure that we do good. And doing good means we do a multivariable risk-benefit analysis, and we say, how can we help people in this situation? So if we have a viral outbreak, for example, what should we be doing? We should be educating, facilitating conditions that enhance immune function. So for example, we want to enhance immune system. What do we do? What do we teach people about diet, about vitamins? What else do we do? We research. Some people are saying vitamin D is good. We should be researching that. Didn't happen. We look at different supplements. We look at what's called complementary medicine. Maybe it's important so that we can save lives, so that we can help people first protect themselves, reduce symptoms, heal, and recuperate. None of this beneficence, do good, happen. Instead, we had parks closed down. In Toronto, I'm from Toronto. Parks were closed down. People were told, don't go up to your cottages. Stay away from one another. Well, we know from beneficence, do good is have people hug, release those hormones and those neurotransmitters, endorphins, because that helps immune function. We didn't have that. We did not ensure that there's family support for people in hospitals. Now, we know for decades that social interaction is essential for good births, mother-infant interaction, for illness, and when people are at the end of their life. We know that social interaction and touching enhances healing. And yet, even though for decades we did this in the hospital, it's been eliminated. And I want to tell you that historically, that's very important from a historical perspective, because at the beginning of the century, people were very obsessed with experts, like we are now, same thing, very obsessed with hygiene, like we are now. And for hygiene and experts, we destroyed normal birth, we destroyed breastfeeding, we pushed families away so people died instead of getting better, and we're doing it again now. So, surges, there's surges up and down. And some of our health officials have said, because we locked you down and we flattened the curve. So what? While you flattened the curve, we also did harm. And that reminds me of the saying that the operation was successful, but the patient died. And then, of course, afterwards, when we have the surge again, they blame the people. No, viruses do go up and down. We need to go to our information about viruses. So what do we see here? What was I seeing, and what was beginning to get me upset was that I see that we are not following, we're not doing good, worse, we're doing harm. Again, no risk-benefit analysis. We're going to lock down. We're going to destroy businesses. Then the healthcare professionals should have looked at, when we destroy businesses, what happens to health? Well, we know that there's an association between low SES, low socioeconomic status, and stress. Stress, we know there's so much information on the HPA axis, which is our stress mechanism in our body. And what's important about the HPA axis and stress is that many of the diseases that people are going to have because of their businesses being closed now, because they can't interact with their families on all holidays, and now some of you have Christmas, many of those diseases, heart disease, autoimmune disease, cancer, mental health disorders, low immunity, many of these diseases are going to show up later on, not now. Are our healthcare officials ready for the surge that we're going to have a few years from now in heart disease? I don't think so. I don't see any plans. So we've done a lot of harm because they didn't compare. They only looked at one variable, reduced the spread of the virus instead of everything. Let's look at justice. Justice means health equity, that an intervention will be available to everyone equally, but will also affect everyone equally. Well, first of all, people without computers or didn't know how to use computers, they were elderly or didn't like computers, they couldn't even order food. We have big lineups here. Essential, you know, the essential, another Q word. People couldn't get food, literally. In the area where I live, if you wanted to order food in, if you were older and you wanted to order food in, you had to wait a month. Should we just die? What about the elderly? Well, some of my colleagues here have spoken about the elderly. Just terrible. There's so much research on how people, especially with elder age, die due to social isolation and loneliness. Loneliness is just as dangerous, if not more, than a virus. A virus where right now and for the past few months in Canada, this virus, most people, it's 97 to 99% of the people will have mild symptoms. For that, you close people down, you destroy their businesses, you increase their risk of cancer in the years ahead. So our elderly were one of the groups that there's no justice, and children. A lot of the courses that I taught are on child development, infant mental health, and I'm very worried about children. Well, children, first of all, they've been scared to death, as their parents have. They've been exposed to their parents' distress. We're worried about anxiety disorders. They're on the increase. And there was a wonderful document that I was allowed to see at the beginning of June, created by the Hospital for Sick Children. They recommended that children go back to school. This was all an evidence-based, very important, evidence-based document, and ethical. Children go back to school, don't wear masks. Teachers don't wear masks because children need to see their expressions. And that they interact normally. Don't put those blinders, those terrible things on. Why? Because they were looking at developmental milestones and what is important for each age. And when we do that, we harm. And the last thing I want to talk about is, how did they do this? Well, autonomy is essential to all other ethical principles. Autonomy means self-determination. It means we respect people. And we believe that people can make their own decisions. But first, we have to give them accurate, valid, and reliable, truthful information. That did not happen. And that's what also opened my eyes, because I would see that they're talking about how many people died, for example, in Italy and Spain. But they didn't give a denominator, the bottom number, meaning how many people died in Italy and Spain out of the number of people who had this disease. Tell me then about the demographics. What were their ages? I looked up on my own. I said, okay, what's the rate of smoking there? I saw that the rate of smoking was higher than here. I saw that their health system is different. In other words, I'm looking at the different variables that our health officials should have been looking at and didn't, and instead scared us. So they provided false information. They still provide false information. They tell us about the number of cases. Okay, but what do you mean by case? Do you mean someone who has a runny nose? Or what do you mean? They just say cases, and that's not ethical because that's not all of the information. They use cutesy little Q words. I hate the one the most. We're all in this together. Don't be selfish. All of this. Creating false images. And now with the vaccine as well, people, we don't know, is this vaccine safe or not? 2-month trial? But look how they're giving information about it. They're doing something that is highly unethical. They're using nurses to promote a product. We nurses have the right, and we are ethically allowed to state our views. Absolutely. However, we are not allowed to promote products. It's a conflict of interest, because a nurse who's getting a vaccine, she might be getting money, or she might just be getting good feedback from her peers that she's already getting something. We are not allowed to promote products. And when a nurse is having her picture taken, getting a vaccine, and there's one with Katie Couric where she also used words like, I'm so happy, this is so wonderful, and I'm coming back to get my second dose. Well, what that does is it influences people, and that's false information. And what I compare that to is the way that they used to use physicians in the 1950s. Has anybody seen those advertisements? Physicians with the cigarette would sell cigarettes, and they would always be dressed in uniform, smoking, Camel brand or whatever brand they had. And just to tell you how dangerous this is, I spoke a little bit about history before, but historically, most unfortunately, we know that nurses and physicians followed policy instead of ethics. If I'm not mistaken, one of these wonderful nurses might be is being investigated for not following policies. Maybe some of you have. We're never supposed to follow policy, because policies such as in the Nazi era were not only unethical, immoral. And nurses and doctors did follow policy at the time. And we never want people to follow policy. We want people to do critical thinking, analysis, abide by ethics. So that's what brought me into this. I'm writing, I'm sending letters to my MP. I received an answer back from my MP, which was very scary for me personally, for my background. And it said something like he's going to be following the orders or the policies. And I thought, well, right back to the Nazi era, very scary stuff. So that's why I'm involved in writing and talking and so on.
Well, good for you. And morality, for people that I know they think they have a sense on the word, but morality is doing what is right regardless of what you are told.
That's
Whereas obedience is doing what you're told regardless of what is right. So which side are you on is what you really need to ask yourself. And I know which side all of you guys are on. I don't have to ask you. I'm asking the viewers. Like, the system also has a majority thinking where legal means right, and you have to remember that slavery was legal, right? That wasn't right by any means. So what are we doing? What are we doing? And what is it going to take to wake people up to a moral code, an actual moral code that isn't backed by a pharma agenda or money or, anything like that? The truth needs to come out. It needs to reign. There needs to be a bloody spotlight shone on all of it at this point, and things need to change. It needs to be built back up from the ground up. And that's just it. So thank you so much, ladies. I have a few questions for you from all of our viewers. So I guess we'll get right into that. So whoever wants to answer can just unmute yourself and hop in. And this is a roundtable discussion at this point. So we'll just bring it on. Let's start with PCR testing. Yay. The inaccuracies. Is it effective? Is it not effective in your eyes?
Case-demic. So we are locking down nations over cases. And like Dr. Karen was saying, do you have a stuffy nose? Are you symptomatic or are you asymptomatic? And they'll put cases 98. Okay, how many of those were actually sick? How many of those actually ended up in the hospital? How many of those people died? Now, because what we're hearing from the inside is that, yes, coronavirus is real, but people are not dropping dead on the sidewalks. They are going by the PCR test, which was never proven to be detecting coronavirus.
Well, even the creator says that's not what it's meant to do. This is not what.
But right from the beginning, they use the PCR test, especially in Massachusetts. This is what they're locking us down over, are the cases. Cases do not mean that somebody is sick.
Yeah. It's the same in Canada as well. And I mean, what about cycling threshold? Do you think that has anything to do with anything?
Yeah, I mean, I heard the more cycles you go through, that
Well, we know that
at
Carrie
some
Mullen.
point it's going to be positive.
More, more.
Well, I know a little bit more about cycle threshold because it's something that we used in genetics a lot, and we never used PCR as like a diagnostic because that was before I was in healthcare. But the cycle threshold is how many times you have to like run the cycle to amplify the sequence of the DNA to get it to, like, I guess you can say, pop up or create your positive, because you're working with like a really minute amount of like nucleic acid, you know. And so typically the more cycle thresholds you have to do to get it, it means you are working with a pretty small sample to begin with, and you're going to have a higher chance of like an inaccuracy. And we've dealt with that in the lab before too, like, you know, random strains and stuff like that. And so that's kind of what like the whole cycle threshold thing means, but I've never seen it used diagnostically like this before. Is that because it was all we had to use, and that's what we use because we were using what we had? I'm not too sure. I mean, I wouldn't have done it that way.
I just want to add.
Oh no, go ahead. I'm going to mute myself again so you don't hear me like.
When you go to the doctor's office and you want to know if you have strep throat, they'll do a strep throat test, and the real test takes 24 hours for the final analysis. So this is what they have been doing. They'll say, we'll give you the antibiotics. Let's wait till see what the final culture shows. And if it's positive, take your antibiotics. But you see, when it comes to coronavirus, everything changes. Everything changes. Logic changes. Science changes. Common sense changes. There is no justification for this case-demic.
No.
Can I add to this?
I'll add.
Okay, so the PCR tests were never meant to diagnose, and they're using this as, honestly, I think it's to ultimately get people in to be testing. You know, they want to see positive cases, so they're going to throw false positives. But this is what's very dangerous, and it's a very slippery slope. From what I saw in what was happening in New York, is they would admit every single patient. So if they come in, I mean, you know, with a cough, I mean, a common,
Hey, Nicole, I think I have to mute.
hey, Nicole.
Sorry.
Sorry. So they'll admit, but there was financial incentive to admit these patients, $13,000 to admit these patients to the floor. Why are they putting financial incentive on diagnosing patients? And, you know, ultimately, I would say 99% of these patients didn't have coronavirus, COVID, whatever it was, but they wanted that money. They were focusing on.
They walked into the hospitals, Erin. Like, we saw it. There were lines, remember, on the news? They walked into the hospital and never walked back out.
Yeah. So they'll admit them to the floors, $13,000, and they don't care, you know, and these are minority populations. They were really focusing on Medicare, Medicaid, Blacks people, Asian people, you know, that was the targeted population, sadly. And then they would be waiting for another test or a test in general. We had rapid tests, even though they are going to throw false positives anyway. 5-10 days, putting them on a ventilator, another paycheck, another $39,000 to put these patients on a ventilator, knowing at the time I got there in, oh my gosh, early April, the height of the pandemic, 100% of these patients had died on the ventilators, every single patient. And then out of the nursing homes, some of these nursing homes were getting $10,000 for every COVID death. So why are we putting financial incentives on this based on inaccurate tests that are not supposed to diagnose in the first place? It's really corrupt. It is a really, honestly, one of the biggest scandals our world has ever seen.
I want to add in too that my small home infusion company was bought by CVS Health. Now, CVS Health is rolling in the dough because they are about the flu shot mandate in Massachusetts. They're about the COVID vaccine and the PCR testing. They have set up so many sites across America. It is a financial gain for them to keep pushing these PCR tests, and they wonder why we're out here speaking right now.
Yep. Can I add? So I add to what everybody says to make what people are saying here about the VCR test not being a reliable or valid test, that it was meant to be a research tool and not a diagnostic tool. There's no template. This is what I've learned. And to add about funding, funding has always been a problem in hospitals. Often you would get, for example, information about breastfeeding from artificial baby milk companies, pharma companies, in order to help people leave breastfeeding. This is not a new idea, unfortunately. And I have been privy to a few physicians' meetings in different countries, not just in Canada. And I understand that in certain hospitals, in certain areas, physicians were encouraged to document, for example, the death cause was COVID, even though a person might have had COVID supposedly with the positive PCR, but in reality, the reasons that killed those people was not COVID. And that's another thing that has increased our rate and the false perceptions in the community. So I've heard this several times, and you know that in research, when some information is repeated in different contexts by different people, it makes it more reliable. So, yeah.
Right. So with the way that the cases are being tallied, it's clearly, it's illusionary to the people that don't understand it, right? Like between the contact tracing, the double counting of the same people every time they go in for tests, false positives, they're not being removed. The cases just keep going up and up and up and up, and people are freaking out because they think that it's back. That curve is back, right?
But it should be going up. We should be, this is what people need to know. First of all, it's winter now. We should be seeing cases of a lot of respiratory infections going up. People need to expect that. We should expect viruses to surge and go down. And we need to normalize, we need to get the correct information to people to normalize some of this information that makes people very frightened. Is there a mutation? Many people might remember that Professor Rutowski, I learned about him as I researched everywhere, and he talked about the possibility of a mutation if we did not allow life to go on. It would allow the virus to mutate and perhaps be worse. We don't know if it's worse. We don't know if all these people who are coming in who are very sick, if what they have is actually COVID, because PCR is not a reliable or valid test, and we're not testing for other things. So again, we're not providing correct information, and it would be helpful if someone who is an expert in this area, occupational health, not necessarily epidemiologist, comes in and helps us understand this a bit more, normalizes things.
Just one more thing to add to that. The cases are going up because they're forcing people to get tested. Colleges, universities, long-term care centers. And we have a nurse that's in our group just to discuss everything that's going on. And she works in long-term care. She said she had to refuse after her 7th test, her 7th time being tested. So all these people are forced to be tested. So that's why the cases are going up.
Yep. Now,
another reason.
Is it true that there's no real data on virulence? And usually the more virulent it is, the less deadly it is anyways? Is that the case? Maybe Nicole?
No, that's not how it works. Virulence typically means, like, depending upon which context it's used, either how deadly it is or how easily it spreads. Because I've seen it used interchangeably, and there's actually only one correct way to use it, but depending upon which context the lay the media is using it, which is, they are not scientists, you can tell that much. And I mean, I'm not like a PhD by any means, but I mean, I had student loans that came from somewhere, and it was for my degree. And so the more virulent, meaning that it's going to either spread faster. Well, you know, the flu is also highly virulent, but people do die from that, and we try and protect those vulnerable people, but it's not the massive death that you would think with Ebola. And like Ebola's virulence, it has a high virulence and mortality rate on top of it. And so the fact that most people don't know this, and that the terms are the vocabulary term virulence is being used inappropriately by the media is what's like telling people and like leading them astray, because virulence sounds super duper scary, but I'm like, man, I read that in a textbook all the time. Like, I don't know. I wasn't as freaked out about it because I already knew from being a biochemist, I kind of knew who would die from it and who would not. I mean, it's what they trained us for. And you know what, when they're forcing us all to stay indoors, I mean, I understand like people move viruses. I'm not ignorant by any means. I have a master's degree in science. So, but when you're forcing everybody to stay indoors and then it spreads, like, you know, you've got a family of 5 or 6, you know, what if you have a big family of like 10 people, multi-generational even, and you force everybody to stay in and then everybody gets it? Of course, like that's how it spreads. Most transmission is within a household. It's not like, hey, I just walked by this person in Walmart and I caught it. That's not how it works. And the contact tracing has been very disappointing in many areas because it's not implemented correctly. I mean, I still have the COVID contact tracing app on my phone for Nevada. I literally walked into COVID units, and since its implementation, and I put it on my phone because I've had it like since the beginning, that they put it out, it has never beeped. I mean, how many people do I walk by on a day in a COVID unit? Never beeped. Wow. I mean, I even sat in an airport. I'm like, I wonder if this thing will go off. No. Never once have I been told I was exposed to COVID, and I've walked into COVID homes. I've walked into COVID units. So a lot of people don't really have a good organizational like set for this, and then the media is like running away with it. Are people dying of COVID? Absolutely. Are hospitals getting overran? Absolutely. Look at the demographics, the comorbidities, and the ages of these people. There's a huge amount of those people in our country congregated into metropolitan settings, and it's going to overrun those hospitals. Absolutely, yes. But what are we doing to protect those people? What if we gave them unemployment and told them to be home safely, and we made sure to bring in social services and you know, that they had, you know, groceries delivered or whatever that they needed, so we can keep the economy going? Because most of us are going to survive it. We just don't want to overwhelm our healthcare systems, and these people keep misusing science. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I saw like that Dr. Fossey guy, who I used to respect, honestly, until he misspoke and flip-flopped mortality and morbidity. And I'm like, he flip-flopped like, what was the other one? Infection rate and mortality rate. And I'm like, and he never corrected himself. Somebody actually did like an 18-page like dissertation on it. It's published, completely analyzing like the whole situation. I'm like, how did nobody else catch that? I mean, literally, when he misspoke, I'm like, what? They're abusing the science, and this should be the greatest time for some of the most technological and science advances, and they're abusing it, and it's very disappointing.
Yeah. I feel like people's ignorance on like with the terms and stuff, like the non-medical people, they're just gaslighting these people into a submission of some sort. In Canada, I know our hospitals are not overrun. They are not. So why do you think it is that the media and the government are still trying to convince people here that it is happening?
Well, money.
I would say.
I
honestly don't know. Why would you intentionally sound ignorant? Like, why would you intentionally report the wrong facts? And then when you get called out on it, you just like, oh, everybody, this month's theme is whatever to distract you from whatever's going on. I've never seen anything like this, and I'm just completely baffled. This isn't how they taught us in school. And I know that was school, but I've also applied this in the real setting. I'm like, I saw the Ebola outbreak in Africa was managed way better than this. TB outbreaks along the border managed way better than this. Even the measles outbreak, I was there for that too, was what managed way better than this.
They just want control. Like, ultimately, this is about control. You know, they're not using, I mean, what they're trying to do is they're inducing fear into the public. They're making everybody really confused. And then anybody like us, you know, that whistleblowers, you know, they don't want to hear our story, even if we're right. And we've been right all along. Everything that all of us have been saying all along, they've gaslighted us. And, you know, made you look like you're some sort of conspiracy theorist. You know, they put these tags on you, you know, but you know what? We're all right. And that is why we are so powerful. And that is exactly why they're trying to silence our voices. And that is also exactly why all of us are here right now. And I can only envision that we're just going to keep growing, because one thing that needs to change is that whistleblowers need a hell of a lot more protection. You know, the majority of us here lost our jobs. We lost our income. I think all of us have children. I'm pretty sure, you know, we're just regular everyday people, but we care about saving lives and, you know, and not supporting an agenda that we know is sinister, and we know that they're lying. We know that they're lying. We have the proof. We have the truth on our side, you know, and I think it's only fair that the public knows this. And so hopefully we can get some more protection for other nurses coming out. It is scary, and that's why a lot more aren't. And like Nicole said, like, I rode those buses back and forth to, you know, the hospital in New York, Elmhurst Hospital. We all talked about the same things. All of us talked about the same exact things. I recorded all of it too. You know, I mean, there's a lot that I know Nicole recorded. I recorded, you know, we haven't even shared half of what we have, you know, and they're terrified of that. You know, we've gotten death threats. I've had to move. I literally had to relocate, move, because of the scrutiny that we're get put through. So how cool would it be to be able to have more protection and, you know, allow other people to speak freely, you know, doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists that were, you know, there watching these people die, you know, and so the public needs to stop living in fear and start listening to outside sources that, you know, everything they censor is everything you need to know. And so
yeah, and they try and like twist everything. You know, when my video went viral, everyone's like, well, how come she's not talking to the news or whatever? And do you know how many of them were trying to warp what I had to say? That's why I never talked to the news. And the only reason I talked with Del is because he was the only one that wouldn't twist what I said. He just said, tell me your story. And I'm like, okay. And literally, I didn't prepare anything. What I said is just what came out of my mouth. And he never tried to twist anything, like Fox News and CNN. They're just like, oh, so you're trying to say that the president, blah, 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 or you're trying to say that the governor, blah, 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 or you're trying to say blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I'm literally telling you that man came in with a freaking knife in his chest, dead on arrival, and they put him down as COVID. And that's what I'm telling you. I don't know about what the politicians do. I just know what's happening right in front of me. And they won't let me take this person off the ventilator, and they're healthy. And my other patient is healthy, and they're forcing me to hang experimental drugs. And, you know, I wouldn't do it. And that's why they got rid of me, because it's unethical. And the drugs were killing people, and nobody was saying anything. And that's what I wanted to say. And they didn't care about that. They just wanted to use me for their agenda. And that's why I never talked to anybody. So they're trying to warp whatever you say. And so we end up not talking to them. Yeah. And we have to go grassroots where we know we're not going to get censored.
Yep, 100%.
I wanted to add, you go back to your question, why are they doing this? And I don't know, maybe money, because pharmaceutical companies are you know, they're companies. They don't hide that. They're companies for profit. But I also think we need to look a bit at the systemic implications. I can't stop thinking about that. And what does this mean for democracy? If you look at history, look at the connection between historical events and when healthcare was compromised and what that meant for other historical events. Again, so if we look back to the Nazi era, they hurt the children and the weak or people with apparent mental health disorders, and or with actual mental health disorders, and then they killed other people. I don't know. I mean, but one thing we also have to be careful of, I listened to a lecture the other day from Professor Yuval Harari, and he talked about how the longer this goes on, the longer people feel unstable, we're going to have more conspiracy theories. And those we have to also be careful about, like to look at the science, and compare actual science to actual events, and then make some good conclusions, make good analysis.
I just want to add one thing.
I want to add something too.
It went from 2 weeks, it's just 2 weeks, to today. Governor Baker, Massachusetts said it's going to take a long time to vaccinate 7 billion people. And I couldn't believe my ears when a governor said that. But I can assure you, he is getting paid. And I want someone to help me to figure it out, because he has stood in front of CVS Health and to sell the flu shot. He stood in front of CVS Health inside the store to talk about vaccinating all the children in Massachusetts, to protect the children. I'm sorry, not to protect the children, because the children have to protect the teachers and the staff. You know where that comes from? Is the Holocaust. Because I listened to the interview from Vera Sharav. She's a Holocaust survivor. And she said, this is what it was like. Because you put the children, you put it on their responsibility. So now it's the children's responsibility to protect the teachers and the staff. And Governor Baker stood at CVS, and I have worked for CVS Health this entire year. I have got the daily updates, and the daily updates emails were just daily updates. But you know what they turned into? In your inbox, it says daily update, COVID-19 updates. Every single day they were sending you updates. So if anyone out there, I want to do a little digging around to see who is getting paid here. What is really going on? Because I don't know. And I want to know. But that's why we're here.
I want to jump into, so a couple of things. I know Dr. Tenpenny shared, the World Health Organization just released a thing about the PCR threshold, and how they've now been advised to shorten the threshold or the number of cycles, because it possibly was bringing up false positives before. And now that they are going to change this threshold cycle to a shorter stance, there's talk that this could now be pushed to kind of contribute to efficacy of the vaccine, saying like, oh, we're having less cases, we're having less positives now because of the vaccines working. So we need to kind of keep in relation there the timing that this did just come out and they are advised to shorten their thresholds. Another thing, I know here in the state of Massachusetts, we've set up COVID testing sites where I'm not even joking, 5 miles of cars lined up to get tested. So if you're sitting in your car able to get tested, there's just this whole push about asymptomatic carriers, and you don't want to kill grandma even if you don't have symptoms. We can't live in a society where you are constantly feeling like you are sick unless someone tells you you're not sick. Because also the CDC site will say this vaccine, like some others, even pertussis vaccine, we are unsure whether or not it's going to actually diminish transmission. So, I mean, it's going to hopefully reduce symptoms in the patient themselves, but you take that vaccine for an individual benefit. This whole idea of do it for somebody else is not proven at this time. So you could get the vaccine, you could still asymptomatically carry it and transfer it to other people. Another thing I know, like we were saying, protection for whistleblowers, nurses. I've been talking, I have several friends who are ICU COVID nurses here in Boston, here in Pennsylvania even, who have said to me that, you know, while the COVID vaccine right now is, you know, a choice, they have been offered free t-shirts. They've been offered $750 bonus at the local nursing home. If you get the vaccine, you are encouraged to then post it on social media and hashtag it. So I've been seeing all the time in my circle of friends, because I'm a nurse, obviously I have a lot of nurse friends, people, you know, enthusiastically posting their picture with the vaccine. Not that I think that they took compensation for it, but that path that if we went down that path, that's not great. Like we said, nurses shouldn't be, you know, promoting products. I'm not a pharma rep. And I shouldn't be putting my choice out there as the best choice, because at the end of the day, we are patient advocates and we need to look individually and support people's decisions for their own, you know, personal health. I know this year, like we were saying about mandating flu shots for the children in schools. I did hear Partners Healthcare, a lot of the healthcare organizations here were no longer accepting religious exemptions for employees. So if you did not receive the flu vaccine, you would be terminated from your job. So while COVID vaccine right now is kind of new and optional, I could see, you know, the push of maintaining a fear around an illness so that this, you know, is accepted as a mandatory, you know, vaccine for schools or for hospitals, which not that I think it ever should be, because I don't support mandated medical treatment. But from working in the schools, I know that our employees are not mandated. I have no knowledge of what their medical, you know, whether or not they receive the flu shot, but I know, you know, we're enforcing all of the children.
Yeah. Yeah. Ladies, I want to tell you, we're coming up on the 2-hour mark and I don't want to hold you up. If you have somewhere to be, it's okay. You can sign off. I'm going to try and get through these questions. If you have to go, I understand. Everybody understands. But I guess what my next question would be is, why isn't anybody checking for antibodies before getting these vaccines?
I'm going to just hop off. So I just wanted to say thank you so much, everyone. You can find me on Instagram, Pure and Simple Flets, and otherwise, as medical people and people that are listening, continue to speak your truth and share light. Be well, everyone.
Thank you so much for coming, Alex. Have a great night. Merry Christmas.
What was the question again?
Sorry, ladies.
About the antibodies,
sorry, Kristen, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Okay. The antibodies are interesting because I know we've been talking about this a lot, and there's actually someone that was on Del Bigtree that came on and talked about it. And in one of our groups, we have a forensic scientist that's been communicating information to us as well. And the antibodies, you know, we have tested up for chickenpox, yes, and looked in this, but the antibodies, like, they wean. So I know, Nicole, I'd like to hear your perspective on this as well, but from the research I've done talking to the forensic scientists, like when you look at antibodies, they're at different levels. So they could be really high kind of at the start when, you know, your body's fighting it off and, you know, it's in your system. But once you've kind of overcome, they still stay there because your antibodies, they remember and they're there, but they wean. So that's why they're kind of like, I know stuff has come out with like COVID and saying like, oh, like you can't actually be immune from it. Like you can get it again. And that's been their argument because they're looking at the antibodies and saying that antibodies have decreased. They're still in your system. They're just not as much as at the start, but they're looking at kind of the differing amounts. What they need to look at is the T cells and the memory cells, and it's different. So I don't know, the antibody thing is an interesting kind of way to look at it. I mean, far better than the PCR, because the PCR at the cycling that they're doing it at, which I think they're cycling at over 30, almost 40. And at that rate, you can find anything. Carrie Mullins, the creator of the test, said if you cycle it over 30 or even over 25, you can find anything that you're looking for, anything. So that's why there's so many false positives. But yeah, the antibodies, I don't know, because they do decrease. And that kind of shows that, you know, gives them a chance to say, oh, but you're not immune because look how low your antibodies are. The T cells would be something interesting to look
Now,
at.
let me ask you ladies a question, and this is a little bit off topic, but this one was put out by one of our viewers. Have any of you used hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin during this whole thing? And if so, benefits versus risks, yay versus nay?
I've never taken hydrochloroquine, but I have something to say about it. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, I felt like I was alone for a minute. So I've been to Nigeria a couple of times, and in Nigeria, you can buy antibiotics and medications at the corner store. And so hydroxychloroquine can be found at the corner store, and it's taken by babies, pregnant women, and old people to prevent malaria. And it's known to be extremely safe. It's been used for over 65 to 70 years, and it's very cheap. And it's known to be quite effective for preventative care, and it's being used by many doctors now to prevent and treat early symptoms of COVID. And so I just thought it was interesting to know. And I also watched a documentary, and I wanted to go check. So I haven't checked this, but I'm pretty sure it's right. And you can go check. But France also had hydroxychloroquine sold over the counter until October 2019, when it was taken off the shelf.
Interesting.
So,
wow. Okay.
that's what I know.
And I just want to add that I actually got some to keep in my closet from the American Frontline Doctors. So if you go to the AmericanFrontlineDoctors.com, you can call them and they will send you hydroxychloroquine with the Zithromax and the zinc. And that is just to keep in your closet just in case you or your family members were to come in contact with COVID-19. And I feel so much more confident.
If we have that.
If we have that, and it's a treatment, we don't need a vaccine.
From what I've seen with the HCQ, the hydroxychloroquine, is that in the medical records that I've been asked to review for like attorneys that are like going over the cases, because I've done a lot of pro bono work reviewing medical records, and a lot of people will get a hold of me and they're like, hey, can you see if they did something to my family member? And I mean, yeah, I'm not a doctor, but that's why we have legal nurse consultants to help with this kind of stuff. It was never given appropriately. It was either given in toxic doses or like ridiculously low doses. Whereas I'm like, how did you even get that? Because there are standard formularies. Like you can only get it in certain doses. How did you give them like 2 milligrams, 5 milligrams? It doesn't come in that format. And I've never seen it in the hospital setting given with the zinc or the azithromycin. It was either like 500 to like, it was like literally 2 grams of it. I'm like, are you kidding me? And when the very first research article came out that was like debunking the HCQ and that, and I read it and I'm like, and I opened up my Medscape app and I'm like, does anybody notice that these are toxic doses? It will literally kill you. No wonder they're having cardiac issues. And I was telling my husband this and I'm like, did anybody peer review this? Like they said it was peer reviewed? Like, did anybody fact check them? Because you can look at the doses. It was bad dosing. And I mean, did you intentionally harm these people? Like, did they know that? And, you know, HCQ is not meant to be used in the hospital setting when they're already like in renal failure and on a dialysis machine and on a ventilator. It was meant to use in the ambulatory care setting. So all these people who keep pulling the studies, and there's so many studies. I haven't even gotten through like all of them because there's so many. They're always on a ventilator, the ones I've seen so far. Or they're always been at day, 15 or something in a hospital on BiPAP. And I'm like, that's not the original protocol. Like, why isn't anybody literally checking this in the ambulatory care setting? The before you get hospitalized setting? I can't find any research on it. It apparently doesn't exist. And that's easier research to do.
I wanted to
a little bit to what Nicole was saying. One thing that with the hydroxychloroquine, certain governors banned this. So this is where they made this political. This is where, the president said, listen, this could help. This could help. So one of the biggest issues that I found during this whole COVID scandal is that the government got in between the doctor-patient relationship. Like when is that ever okay? When every single person should be treated as an individual. So we used it at my hospital in Florida successfully. Yes, it needs to be given early on. Yes, dosage matters, but that's for the doctor to decide. That's not for the government to decide. So yes, it saved every one of our patients. And then when I got to New York, and Nicole will vouch for this, it's banned. They just threw everybody on a ventilator anyway, and it killed every single patient. So why are they banning alternative treatments? I'm going to add, there's quercetin. It's a supplement. It acts similar to hydroxychloroquine. So I think that I always tell people that, they should have the quercetin, zinc, vitamin C, and vitamin D. Everyone should be taking at least those 4 supplements, the good probiotic. And that's another thing that nobody's talking about is what can you do to make sure that you don't get sick? Like it's just like that's been completely off limits.
Yep, no, and that's one of my questions. So let's talk about preventative measures.
And it's not, they want to force this vaccine. And I don't know. I mean, Americans are known to be kind of lazy. I don't know about Canada, but I mean, people want quick fixes. They want the easy way out. They don't want to put the work in, and they don't really care. We can't be like that. And especially, and it's so sad to see like so many healthcare professionals touting this vaccine and not talking about what we can do to be proactive in our care. That's our job. Yeah. And it's not happening. And anybody that does speak about it, oh, you guys are crazy. What is so crazy? What's crazy about, wanting to take care of yourself and not wanting to live in fear, and being, just blinded by whatever they want to feed you. So I guess that's my 2 cents on that.
It's also part of our. Sorry.
I just want to add. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
It's part. Go ahead. No, you go. Oh, okay. Me? Okay. It's part of our ethical code, actually, to talk about it, and they haven't. So that's one of the things that was a red light for me. Beneficence is part of the ethical code. So what they should have done, they were obligated to do, was to talk about diet, sleep, exercise, social interaction, hugging, and so on. They didn't. That's what, like I said, that's what really bothered me and started me thinking. And so it's not just a good thing to do. Actually, healthcare providers are obligated to do that. And not only did they not teach us about it, they created conditions that interfered with beneficence, with do good. And they would shame and blame, like Erin was saying, shame and blame anyone who did that. And the minimal amount of preventative medicine, at least here in Canada, and I've actually looked at some of the ads in the States as well, in health promotion, there's a specific way you're supposed to teach. You're supposed to teach in a way that allows the learner to move theory to practice. So if we're going to tell people to wear masks, which are so dangerous, especially the way they're being worn, we should have lessons like we all learned. Remember how we learned and we had to do it right, and the specific way, and all. People are wearing masks all sorts of crazy ways. They never taught about it. They just said, wear a mask. And when they did hand washing, it is in Canada, wash your hands. And then you see these hands going like this, like, the wheels on the bus go around. That's how they were taught. So yes, we have, that's an ethical violation. And it's not just we should, we were obligated to do that. They were obligated to do that. And
okay,
didn't happen.
Can I just add in too? Because I'm also a certified personal trainer, group exercise instructor, board certified holistic nurse, and I have a plant-based certificate. Exercise, it's been proven that 1 hour exercise a day releases the happy hormones for 12 hours. So you get your exercise in once a day and you're happy for 12 hours. So you just have to do it every day. Get off the processed food. Get off the white flours and the white sugars. Do stress relief. Those things right there, you have complete control over your diet, your stress level, and your exercise. Those are 3 things that nobody's talking about, and it drives me crazy. I learned more about health in my 6-month personal training course than I did in my 4 years of nursing. It's very sad, but I've been teaching Group X for almost 20 years. Please get your exercise, focus on your stress relief, take out the processed food, and eat healthy and take control of your life. Those will reduce your likelihood of getting any virus, any bacteria, and you'll feel great and you'll be happy.
Wonderful.
And your
Thanks.
immune system will be enhanced because those happy hormones, the oxytocin, serotonin, these interact. They enhance an appropriate inflammatory response versus cytokine storm, and so on. So yeah. I don't know about in the States, but here people were punished when they went to parks. You know, there were parts of our parks that were closed off. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's getting crazier around here. I know that, between ice skating and being apprehended and ticketed for peacefully protesting. It's been a gong show around here lately. So, and a few of you in this group can attest to that. But okay, so I guess was there anything that you guys were being told by your higher ups to falsely put out to the public? That's one of my questions I wanted to know.
I will say something on that. And Nicole will probably vouch for this, but when we got to New York, we were put on gag orders essentially. So what they did tell us is if you say anything, if you keep asking questions, you're gonna get fired and you're gonna lose your paycheck. The paychecks were $10,000 a week for nurses. This is hush money, in my opinion. Who wants to lose that paycheck? Well, Nicole and I didn't care. You know, I mean, what is a life worth? I mean, honestly, what are thousands of lives worth? You know, what is moving forward in our future, in our children's future? What's that worth? You know what I mean? So yeah, we were ultimately, I was fired from New York. Nicole was fired from New York for speaking up and advocating for our patients. So that's what they told us over and over and over. Be a good nurse, keep your mouth shut, and you'll be fine. You'll make it through. You know, it was literally the Hunger Games, play by our rules or you're done. And that's exactly how it went. Exactly.
I was so sick and tired of everybody telling me I was a good nurse and I can't save everybody that I was going to lose it if one more person told me I was a good nurse and we're in a pandemic and we can't. That was their excuse for everything. We're in a pandemic. And I'm like, I don't think the family cares that we're in a pandemic and that's the reason that their family member died. I mean, like, if you weren't trying to hide something, why did you make us all sign non-disclosure agreements? Literally, if we said anything about what was going on in those hospitals, we were out. It was even in the paperwork. We could be sued. And that's like where Erin and I are like super stressed, because they're going to come after us once like they have an opportunity because we broke the non-disclosure. We told them what was going on because do you really think we were the only ones that saw that? Or we were just the only ones willing to risk it? They had a lot of people over a barrel.
Non-disclosure is okay to break when they're murdering people. And
yes, it is. They're murdering people, but they're still.
I think that they haven't. I mean, I've gotten a couple letters. We want all your undercover videos, and I'm like, yeah, I'm right on that. But I mean, that's all I've heard because they know that what we have will literally, probably, and hopefully in time, it's going to blow up everything. And I hope that it does. And I hope to put every single one of these people that have been the order givers and all the order followers in prison or in jail, and I want it on trial, because this was crimes against humanity. End of story. Like what we saw, all these bodies in the freezer trucks, that was not due to COVID. That was due to pure negligence and murder. And how awful to have your life ended like that. You know, they weren't even seen as people anymore. They were just seen as another price tag. And how do you possibly stay quiet? And I'm just going to add one more thing before, and then I'm not going to, I have a number that's for any nurses that want to come forward. It's to me, it's directly to me. You can text me or you can call me. And we're working on the globalfrontlinenurses.com. We're going to have our summit event, a live event. All of these beautiful women have bought their tickets already. It's going to be in Tampa. But if you're a nurse and you want to participate and speak out with us and do what's right and stand on the right side of history, the number is 813-586-0601. So
Awesome.
We'd love you to join us.
Yep. And that's on January 9th, again in Tampa, Florida, guys. So if your heart is breaking, if you know what's happening is wrong, please get in touch with these ladies and get your butt to the summit. Like, it's so imperative at this point. Things have to change, and I can't stress that enough. Like, this is absolutely out of control at this point. But out of chaos comes order. So yeah. How has the censorship and docking been affecting you ladies? Like, it has to be insurmountable once you came out.
Yeah. Oh, I can attest for that. So I had somebody call my job because of Facebook post and complained to my supervisor, and my supervisor called me, which I never get a call from her. I've never had a complaint in the 9 years I've been there, stating that someone had called the complaint line. And I'm going, we have a complaint line from a post from Facebook, you know, but I still continue on doing what I'm doing. But I've had 3 banned videos because I do have my own platform on YouTube. They've taken down 3 videos. One was my interview with Tammy Clark about masks. Another one was about vaccines. And then the other one was when I told people that I left my nurse job. So, you know, and then you have the haters. You do have the haters, and they say really mean things. And I have to say that the people who have been mean are the men.
But you have to also remember that the people that are most mean are the most fearful. And, you know, I wish them well. Yeah. I wish them well.
I've also haven't seen anybody, like, nobody will stick up for you if you're talking to people on, you know, say Facebook. Nobody really comes to your rescue. That's been my, you know, what's happened to me. Yeah. But yeah, I'm banned from YouTube right now. I can't upload anything for 2 weeks, and it's all for speaking the truth. You know, I'm not out there violence or swearing, or there's no inappropriate activity going on, but they said they banned my video because it was inappropriate content.
Yeah.
And it wasn't appropriate for children. It was I made this beautiful video about how I left my nurse job, and so it wasn't appropriate for children.
Wow.
So I'm not stopping.
Well, this one won't be up long. I can promise you that. It's just.
Yeah, anything with my name, or if I even talk about New York or COVID, like my computer will get glitchy. And I'm not like a conspiracy theorist, but did you see how many times I had to log out and log back in because like I got nothing? Yeah. I mean, I was like super afraid. Like when I did the high wire, I'm like, oh my gosh, my internet is just gonna go down. Just watch right in the middle of this. I'm like, we need to pre-record this so we can anticipate any problems. And I'm like anything with my name got taken down off the internet. I mean, I even think my old like university like removed me out of like the graduation records that were public. I'm like, oh, because you can't find me anywhere. I mean, I had a very private life to begin with. Like I had a Facebook like page, and that was it. But I mean, like there were people petitioning to get my nursing license taken. They like, I'm pretty much blacklisted anywhere in town. I mean, I have taken a couple COVID, crisis jobs to make ends meet, and I last only as long as people don't know who I am, and then I get ran off because I'm a whistleblower. Yeah. And then I also have like people who just try to manipulate me. So like over the summer, there was a hospital conglomeration from Texas that got a hold of me. I accidentally answered the phone thinking it was someone from like my university that was supposed to call me, and I answer it, and they were offering me to come down to like help fight the COVID pandemic. And I'm like, oh, maybe they just super duper need nurses and they'll take anybody, like a whistleblower. And I'm listening, and I'm like, well, what kind of events are you running? Like, what's the staffing ratio? And they're like, oh, no, you won't be at the bedside. We want you to go around to the communities and talk to the Hispanic people and tell them why they should go in and get tested and go into the hospital. And I'm like, what? Like, I'm a nurse. Like, I'm not a desk jockey. I'm not an administrator person. I am not a social media influencer. I'm a nurse. Okay? Advocates are not social media influencers, guys. And I asked them, like, wow, what's going on? And they're like, we just want someone that they trust for them to listen to, go into the hospital if they get sick. And I'm like, well, are you pulling bodies out of buildings? Like, are you finding, like, people dead in the gutters? Is it, like, super bad? What's going on? They're like, no, we just want to keep them overnight and check on them. And I'm like, if they're not sick, why do you want them in the hospital? Remember, everyone should stay home if they don't need to be in the hospital. We don't have enough hospital beds. That's what happened in New York. If you got sick, they told you to go to the hospital, and it created the problem. And I'm like, no, I'm not interested in that. They're like, we'll pay you $15,000 a week. I'm not even joking, you guys. I wish I was prepared for that call. Like, I think it's illegal to record phone calls, but I should have recorded it. Like, I was like driving, and I'm like, what? Why would you pay somebody $15,000 a week to go around and talk to people? I am not like a sports, like, basketball person. I'm not like, I don't know, insert celebrity name here. I haven't watched a lot of movies. Like, I don't know, somebody from the movies. Why would you offer me that kind of money? Because I have a huge Hispanic following, because, like, most people actually don't realize this, is my mom's from Spain, my dad's from Portugal. So a lot of people, like, follow me, and I get a lot of people, like, contacting me from, like, Spanish-speaking countries. And I'm like, my mom and my grandma always told me if the deal seems a little too good, it probably is. And I'm like, you know what? We can pay the mortgage, so I'm not going to sell my soul today. Sorry. I'm going to let you go. Like, why would you offer some, like, hick from the sticks nurse, like, $15,000 a week to go around community to community telling, like, Hispanic people to go to the hospital if they catch COVID? They'll go if they can't breathe. They don't need me to tell them, hey, if you have a cough or allergies, you should go to the hospital. I would never trust that. That just seems scary. I mean, so you got all these people trying to, like, manipulate you, and if they can't use you for their gain, they'll turn against you. I mean, I get death threats pretty routinely. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Remember that one time, Erin, when I, like, had to, like, call you in, like, the middle of the night, and I was freaking out because that person tried to break into my house? It was like hysterical. Nothing like that happens to me. I'm just a normal person. And I mean, even pictures, like, we have a family friend who does our family photos every year. Even on her Facebook pages and websites, the pictures of my family, like, they don't exist anymore. Because I asked her, I'm like, hey, what happened to this one photo? I can't find it anymore because my Facebook got censored. She doesn't have them either. Like, anything. You can't find me anymore. That's why I'm like, shoot, I should check in on Facebook so somebody doesn't think I, like, died. It's bad.
It is.
Why? I'm just a nurse. Like, I'm nobody of any power.
But you're going against the agenda.
And what most people don't realize is that they trust us to do the right thing. And I think that people are realizing that, and they're trying to turn us into puppets. And they can't do that. Because if they couldn't do that to us in New York, they sure as heck can't do it to us now.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, ladies, I don't want to hold you up, so I'm going to go around the table here and I'm going to say, what is one piece of info that you would like to leave everyone with today that you think is imperative that they know or understand about this year or going into the next year? Sarah, you want to go first?
Nope.
No.
I can go. I can go.
I can go. Oh, girl.
I think for too long. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Okay, my phone's about to die any second. But I just wanted to say, we do have Nurses Against Lockdown online on every platform. Since we're talking about censorship, we blew up. It's doing great. It's on Instagram. We have a Facebook page, and we also have a private group for nurses for support. And we have Zoom meetings on Monday mornings and stuff like that. But we're also now on Parley, BitChute, MeWe, and Gab. And so I want to make sure that as much people follow us, because we're getting so much shares, and I think planting seeds is like very important right now. And so that's for my part. But like, yeah, that's all I have to say for now.
Awesome. Nurses Against Lockdowns, guys. That's Canada. I guess that's worldwide, but that's Sarah. So Nurses Against Lockdowns. Go find it. Anybody else have something to say?
Yeah, I want to say, please take off the masks.
Thank you.
Please take off the masks. They are doing more harm than good, and they are harming our children more than you will ever know. I know that there are parents out there who feel intuitively that it's wrong, and you feel terrible sending your kids to school. I'm sorry. It's time to stand up and say no more masks. Please go grocery shopping without your mask on, because when one person does it, more people will do it. It only takes one. More people need to take their masks off, because my patients are so nervous and they're going to die wearing their masks because they're so scared. Masks do not protect you, and they do more harm than good. Please take off the masks.
Awesome. Does anybody else want to go, or are we all good?
I'll go.
Okay, go ahead.
I just have like one thing to say. So if you think that, and this is for anybody, you know, if you see something, say something. And even if you think, oh, I'm just one person, no way. Every single voice matters. I mean, that's the whole ripple effect. You know, you inspire other people by speaking up. You know, you don't have to go, you know, like I did and wear spy glasses undercover and record everything and then put it on an expose and go, you know, you can do little things, you know, just little things in your community, just educating, you know, just planting the seeds. And honestly, just stop complying if you know it's wrong. You know, obviously it's easier to walk around and comply and but think about what's going to happen if everybody just stops complying. You know, ultimately we need to protect the future of our children and future generations. That's where my heart is. That's where my fight is. And that's why I don't care how many threats or death threats or, you know, whatever hell I need to go through, like nobody will put out my fire, because my 3 boys, your kids, our future generations, that's what matters. End of story. I want to stand on the right side of history, and I'm hoping that people all over the world want to stand on the right side of history with us. So be brave and never be afraid to use your voice and speak up if you know that something's wrong.
Yep. 100%. 100%. And somebody's looking for the website for Nurses Against Lockdown. Sarah, what's that? Is there a website or just an email?
Someone's been working on that website for a month and it's still not ready. So hopefully it'll be ready soon. But and they can also email us at nursesagainstlockdown@hotmail.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I won't keep you ladies. I know this has been long, but the people needed to hear from you collectively.
I could talk forever.
Hey, I'd listen to you forever. I could. You know. Absolutely.
Can I say one thing? I feel, first of all, I want people to start asking good questions and stop just watching CNN, CBC, and all that. Ask good questions. And I want to say something to my fellow physicians, nurses, researchers, or any health service provider. Come on, get off that Zoom, your arts and craft class, or whatever. We have an obligation. We need to tell the truth. You need to research properly and start talking the truth. If we had all spoken at the beginning, not just a few of us, none of this would be as it is today. So get off your Zoom. I mean, Zoom for not this kind of Zoom. And let's start learning,
Advocating
and helping
is
people.
very absolutely. And if you are a
Yes,
nurse or you are a
advocating.
doctor and you need to be put in touch with these ladies as well, you know, you can contact chdcanada@protonmail.com. We'll put you in touch with whoever you're looking for. Get more information on the summit happening January 9th. If you're a nurse, it's going to be spectacular. Tampa, Florida. Who doesn't want to be there at that time of year? Other than that, I can't thank you ladies enough. Like, the amount of information is just insurmountable, and there is not enough hours in a day to sit here and pick it out of each and every one of you. So thank you so much. I hope we can do this again sometime. Maybe we'll shrink it down to like an hour, but I know you have so many wonderful things and so many stories and whatnot. So thank you so much. Like, comment, and share, everybody. If you haven't seen it yet, go check out 1986 The Act, as well as Vax 2. You can check that out on the websites. And other than that, have a great day, guys. And thanks for joining us. Bye.